Hello, entomology class. Today we're going to cover Module 3, Lesson 8. A is kind of all about the evolution of flight in insects, evolution of flight, and how flight works. I'm going to try and cover it fairly quickly. Don't need a super long one here, hopefully. There's a lot of advantages to flight. Insects evolved earliest. I'll talk about that in a second, but we're talking 350 million years ago, long before the earliest vertebrates. It's really good for thermal regulation, heating up or cooling down. Insects are cold-blooded, and don't make mistakes that they might be warm-blooded. They're not really warm-blooded creatures, but there is some thermal regulation that benefits from being able to fly, both on the cooling side and the heating side. Allows for dispersion, new resources, new areas, new habitats, finding new niches, evolving new. We talked about the success of insects and how they can be just about anywhere, and so there's a lot of that coming through flight and the benefits of flight. They're quick, and flight makes them quick, gets away from predators, but also allows you to become a better predator, like a dragonfly, which I talked about in the Dictyoptera, or not the Dictyoptera, the Paleoptera. Great flyers, great attackers. Helps you to find mates more easily, and along those lines helps for some advertisement in finding mates, getting out there, make yourself known, that you're there, but also camouflage. Wings have become this great thing to add coloration, take coloration away, hide, that sort of a thing. Protection, get away from things, kind of already talked about that. There seems to be a lot of intelligence that was tied to the ability to fly. Evolving flight allows for evolving better problem-solving abilities. And of course, insects aren't on the level of birds per chance, or by any stretch of the imagination, but there's some really cool stuff going on there. Sound generation, and we'll talk a little bit about wing folding and wing muscles as well. We have some really old fossils. In the Paleoptera lecture, we talked a little bit about the Dictyoptera, or Paleodictyoptera. Some really old fossils of flying insects, which I'll kind of bring up again in a minute. But they rule the air for probably 150 million years. There's nothing else in the flying around at all, and so that's really kind of cool. And we have lots of really great fossils of winged insects, like these dragonfly and damselfly in our Paleoptera. Like I said, flight's only evolved 4 times. We're talking insects, bats, pterosaurs, and birds. And if you look at it, birds and pterosaurs and bats kind of all did the same thing. Like, hey, we've got a limb, we're a tetrapod, let's extend out some skin or feathers off the bone and fly it that way. Right? That's pretty cool. Insects did not do that. Insects, their wings evolved on the same segment as legs, so they didn't co-opt a leg into a wing. They had to evolve it a different way. And there's a lot of controversy. There's so many different hypotheses. We're going to kind of cover 3 hypotheses, and there's some cool genetic data that's kind of really helping us along on what probably did happen. So here we have in hypothesis 1, we can call this the pleuron origin hypothesis. So the pleuron is the side of the thorax, right? The 2 sides, you got the top and the 2 sides. So this was a hypothesis that out of that side evolved another structure that would become the wing. The leg is going to be at the bottom of the pleuron on the thorax. The wing is actually going to be at the top. So we evolved from that. There's gills in those areas. You can see here, as we look at it, we have a mayfly larva here, and there's gills, which these things actually look like little, well, they are going to become the wings, but there's gills there. There's gills on the stonefly larvae. Early hypotheses thought that maybe these gills were then used, they flipped them up and then scooted across the water using something like that. So that's kind of evolving out of the pleuron. So here you can see that here's the pleuron right here, and the wings would have evolved out of part of this structure here. It's a complicated thing to do, but we'll get into that a little bit. Then there is the evolved as extensions of the dorsal body wall, right? So we have the tegmen up here on top, and the idea that something evolved out of the top of that, out the sides that way. And we have some gills that have done similar things like that have probably evolved in wings. That early Paleodictyopter that we talked about up here in the corner, early fossils suggest there, on that third segment there might have been a wing there, or a gill of some kind. That's kind of helping this hypothesis along. But again, these are just fossils. We don't know for certain if those would have evolved that way. So we need more data. Where can we get more data? Well, we've got hypothesis 3, which is both tergal and pleural components contribute to the evolution of the wings. And there's a cool paper that's somewhat recent, just a few years old now, in which they show, all right, so we're looking at homeotic transformation. We're looking at signatures of gene expression in the wings and where that gene expression may have occurred in the organism as well. If you look at that first segment of the thorax, there's 3 segments of the thorax, right? The prothorax, mesothorax, and postthorax. In those 3 segments, or metathorax is called in some books as well, we can look at that first segment that doesn't have a wing and say what is being expressed there that's then being expressed as a wing. And they found, you can see here in yellow are pleural wing serial homologs, genes basically, and here are tergal wing serial homologs being expressed. So it looks like the wing may have been a combination of parts, right? Tergal parts as well as pleural plates, because wings are complicated things that we've got to have. So if we look at it, the wings have to have 2 layers of cuticle and trachea in between them. That's not a non-complicated structure. They also have to have muscles at the base of the wing. They have to have some hemolymph that can pump through there on the wing as well. So it's a complicated structure, and it's evolving de novo. It's not evolving from a leg like we see in all the vertebrates. So it's very complicated. It's also very, very old, so it's very difficult to kind of figure out what had gone on there. This is kind of rehashing what we've already talked about. We have the prothorax, the mesothorax, and the metathorax. All 3 of those thoracic segments have a leg attached, and only the meso and meta have a wing attached. Okay, so the prothorax has some other cool things going on, like we see in the tree hoppers, which we'll talk about in the next lesson, lesson 9. But there's some cool questions we answered about the wings, kind of looking at that prothorax as well. Just remember though, the mesa and meta is where the wings are attached. We've got the modern insect. That's all we have. And the earliest, or the base of that insect tree for all those is going to have that. So any insects that don't have 2 sets of wings on the mesa and metathorax have lost one or both secondarily. So how do insect wings work? Well, it's pretty cool. This is basically a tube. All right, that's the thorax. All right, so here's one thoracic segment that's kind of a tube, and the tube can be flexed different ways, right? Let me see if I can get this lined up with the camera. It can be flexed like this, it can be flexed like that, and then there's the wing attached to that, and a fulcrum, right? Just like a seesaw has a fulcrum right in the middle that can flip the wing up and down over that fulcrum. Okay, let's keep looking here. So if we have muscles attached directly to the wing and they flex, pull that wing up over the fulcrum, right? Up over the fulcrum like that. Okay? And because of that, we have what's called direct flight muscles and indirect flight muscles. And you can kind of look at those. If in the lesson, you can see this YouTube video. You can click on that link and kind of watch how some of those work. So let's kind of take another look at this figure here. I like it. So here are the direct flight muscles. Direct flight muscles are attached to the wing, right? So attached up here at the base of the wing and out a little bit, and with the fulcrum there. So as they squeeze and pull down, pulls the wing up, and relaxed, they're gonna let the wing sag. So pulled up and relaxed. Now if we look at the next flight, or next thing here, these are our indirect flight muscles. Okay, so these attach to the top and bottom of the thorax, the dorsal and the ventral surfaces, and pull that in. So again, with that fulcrum, you pull the top apart, top down. It's gonna make those wings go up over that fulcrum, right? You pull the top down, the wings are going to go up, relax it, and flex the longitudinal muscles the other direction. It's going to relax that, and they're going to go down. Right? It's going to pull those down. There are different groups that use indirect versus direct flight muscles. We don't need to worry too much about which groups are using which. I'm not going to get into that kind of detail. But Diptera and Hymenoptera are using a lot of these indirect flight muscles, and they're pretty important. And those are some pretty good flyers, those two groups. Here's just kind of another way of looking at that to see that fulcrum. Here's the wing in blue, and in red is kind of the base of the wing. You're going to have some muscle attachment and other stuff. And then it can fold over, right? This pleural process kind of helps with the click mechanism to click it out and then go back in. Those are complicated, but it's also kind of simplistic for getting a wing up and down. Now it gets a little bit more complicated because, as we'll see in a minute, they sometimes fly in, they make their wings go in fairly complicated directions, but we'll get to that shortly. So if we look at kind of the Paleoptera, the Odonata and Ephemeroptera, they don't have a lot of complexity. Now, don't get me wrong, dragonflies flight is very complex. They're very fast. They're very good flyers, but they usually just are more of an up and down direction. All right, that we see in the dragonflies and these older, more primitive insects and how they work. One key to this is that they often have their wings working in opposite directions all the time. They're not coordinated as much. All right. And then in the Neoptera, so the Neoptera is everything after the Paleoptera. So all the Polyneoptera, all the Perineoptera, and all the Holometabula usually have more complicated flight. Sometimes they only use one wing to fly, like we see in this beetle. It's got one flight wing and one hard elytra. So this elytra is a modified wing. You probably remember back from when we talked morphology, right? And then butterflies, they fly with both their wings, and they have little mechanisms to help keep their wings together a little bit, which you'll see when we talk Lepidoptera. Other insects have different mechanisms. Some use one pair for functional flight, like we just saw in the beetle. Grasshoppers are going to do the same thing. Others couple their wings together in flight to make them work more effectively, like cicadas do, like the butterflies I just talked about. The bees also do this. Bees have some pretty crazy complicated flight. Their flight path is actually kind of a figure eight, and you can kind of see it on this slide, but if you watch this video, which is also linked, it's ultra slow motion of that. You can see that the front and hind wing are attached together with this hamuli, and the direction of the flight is unbelievably fast and really, really, really cool. So you should definitely just watch a couple minutes of it just to see how it works. And the hind wing is completely attached. You can see following that forewing. It really wouldn't work to do it a different way for these bees that have this really kind of incredibly complicated flight. Now, we don't need to get too deep into the physics of all this, but if there's this tiny little insect with very almost no weight to it, the air actually becomes very viscous. It's kind of like us being in water. And so the direction of the flight of the wing kind of creates these air pockets, right? Blue areas of low air pressure. The blue swirls are little air vortices. The orange oval is air of high pressure that kind of floats around the wing as it does its different pattern to make the wing fly and the insect fly with these really cool beating motions going on. And they're incredibly fast, right? Just kind of craziness to look at. Honeybees can beat their wings 250 times in 1 second. That's insane. Bumblebees 130 times, housefly 190 times. I mean, these are just kind of incredibly fast beats per minute. It does not directly correlate to speed of the insect. You can see the Ashton dragonfly can fly up to almost 16 miles an hour. It's only got 38 beats per second, but has big wings that has very good control over those. Honeybee, you're looking at about 6 miles an hour, even though they can beat 250 beats per second. So there's not a direct correlation, but the best flyers are the ones that are going to go the fastest. That's probably not that surprising. And that's it for this one. So I'm going to throw it up there and you can watch it for Module 3, Lesson 8.